order. Welcome to meeting number 41st of the House of Commons Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. La réunion d'aujourd'hui.
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. To ensure a proper conduct of the meeting, I would like to give some reminders to the witnesses and MPs.
Recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Regarding interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Pour les députés présents dans la salle.
For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will do our best to manage the speaking order, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard.
With the committee's routine motion concerning connection test for witness, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Now, please join me in welcoming the witnesses who are appearing this morning as we continue our study of international disability inclusive education. From University of Ottawa, Madame Mona Paré, professeure titulaire. Le Centre de recherche pour le développement.
Center for Research for International Development, Mr. Nasser Farouki. Director of Programs, Education and Science.
For the world, Ms. Nafisa Babu, Director, Inclusive and Education. She is attending this meeting by video conference. For International Disability Alliance, Mr. José Vieira, Director of Advocacy, by video conference. Ms. Dorothy Sharma, Senior Advisor Advocacy and Engagement, by video conference too. Thank you for being with us today. You will have a maximum of 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we will move on to questions with members of the subcommittee. I will let you know when you have 1 minute left. Nous allons commencer par Madame.
We shall start with Ms. Paré. Thank you for accepting to appear before us. You have the floor for 5 minutes, Ms. Paré. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the subcommittee, for inviting me to contribute to your very important work in this area of the human rights. Canada has obligations with respect to disability-inclusive education under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Convention on the Rights of Disabled Children. Canada must implement the rights of children with disabilities, both within the country and abroad, through international cooperation. By children with disabilities, I mean children with physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory disabilities, as defined in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In the school context, for example, in Ontario, we talk about children with difficulty with behavioral, communication, intellectual, physical, or multiple abnormalities. We are therefore faced with a heterogeneous group, and that is the great challenge for inclusive education. Internationally, we talk about inclusive education, and that has been advocated for many years. In Canada, in the provinces, we've also taken measures to promote education in regular schools. However, one problem that persists is a lack of a definition for inclusive education. And for children with disabilities, we often talk about integrating into regular classes rather than inclusion. The philosophy of inclusive education seeks an education in a school system where all children can learn together. Children feel included, and the needs of all children are taken into account with a view towards their participation in society. And this goes beyond the disability. And through inclusive education, we are targeting minorities and groups that have traditionally been segregated and whose realities have not been taken into account in school: linguistic, religious, racial minorities, newcomers, and so on. Integration, on the other hand, is not necessarily part of this philosophy. We are interested simply in the child's placement. This is a model where it may be up to the student placed in a regular classroom to adapt to the school rather than the contrary, and we'll try to help the student adapt through reasonable accommodations. So even if inclusive education is the ideal, many families, looking at their realities, prefer their children to be in separate classes so that they can receive the services they need. This is often the case for children with severe learning disabilities. Parents want optimal learning conditions for these children so that they can reach their full potential. Other families would prefer integration even when an inclusive education model is not perfectly followed, because the social participation in the life of society is more important than the level of education achieved. This is often the case for children with intellectual disabilities. So when we talk about inclusive education, we should not forget the heterogeneous nature of disability and the very wide variety of needs, not only from one child to another, but also from one type of disability to another. The educational needs of children and the expectations of families are very different. Whether we are dealing with a physical disability, an intellectual disability, a learning disability such as dyslexia, or deafness, for example, it should not be forgot. We shouldn't forget that representatives of the deaf community have ensured that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities does not prohibit separate education for sign language users. Ultimately, the question of children, the education of disabled children, comes down to the application of the principle of the best interest of the child. There is a certain consensus now, including amongst Canadian courts, that inclusion is a reference standard, but it's not an absolute standard, and each individual case must be examined on its merits. The main issue, of course, is resources. With a lack of staff and services in mainstream schools and classrooms, it becomes easy to say that segregated education is in the child's best interest. If we made sure we had the resources to meet every child's educational need, I would be surprised if we didn't always determine that inclusion is in every child's best interest. To conclude, in line with our international obligations, it is important to invest in education, bearing in mind that inclusive education can help to meet several aims of education: developing a spirit of understanding, tolerance, equality, and participation in the life of society. In a rights-based approach, however, care must be taken to avoid one-size-fits-all approaches, as each child is a subject of rights with his or her own unique identity, needs, and interests. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Paré.
Mr. Farouki to take the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of this committee. It's a pleasure for me to be here today.
Invitation to appear. My name is Nasser Farouki, and I'm the Director of Education and Science for the International Development Research Center, or IDRC. IDRC is a Crown corporation established in 1970 that reports to Parliament through the Minister of International Development. We support research and innovation in low and middle income countries as part of Canada's official assistance, development assistance. And two principles underpin our support to local actors. First, that those closest to development problems are best placed to develop innovative solutions to solve them. And second, the importance of sharing what works across regions and internationally. Previous witnesses have made clear the need for action on disability-inclusive education. We are working with many of those organizations, and what IDRC would like to bring to this discussion is the need for and the power of research and evidence to effectively respond to the educational needs of people with disabilities. There's a genuine demand in the Global South for evidence on the most effective ways to strengthen education for all learners. IDRC's work is responding to this demand and looking to scale what works. Complementary to Canada's important investments in the Global Partnership for Education, IDRC hosts the research and evidence arm of this international fund. We call it the Knowledge and Innovation Exchange, or KICS for short. KICS builds evidence on how proven innovations can improve education systems in low and middle income countries. To optimize limited resources available to national education systems in these countries, our approach identifies innovations that work and builds evidence on how to scale them. These innovations cover a broad spectrum from educational technology solutions to cost-effective community-based early learning models. I'd like to share 4 of the areas where IDRC is strengthening the evidence critical to advancing disability-inclusive education. First, better understanding the realities of children learning with disabilities to improve their education access and learning. Without clear data on disabilities, including baselines and gaps, we're unable to respond to all children's needs. IDRC is supporting countries to strengthen their education data systems, including integrating data on disabilities to provide schools with the information that they need to plan for inclusive education. Second, inclusive education in the early years is critical to identify disabilities and pave the way for success through a child's education. IDRC is supporting community-based pre-primary centers to identify and include children with multiple types of disabilities early on, especially in rural communities where these children often fall through the cracks. Third, harnessing the potential of technologies in the classroom and ensuring that they're inclusive and that teachers know how to support those technologies. Artificial intelligence technologies hold promise, but they're often not accessible in local languages. So we're supporting the development, for example, of an assistive technology that translates spoken English to Kenyan Sign Language using virtual signing characters. And this will help Kenyans with learning disabilities access education more easily, as there are few qualified Kenyan Sign Language interpreters in the country. And lastly, it's clear that disability-inclusive initiatives cannot be isolated from the overall system. We're learning how to integrate inclusive education into public education systems adapted to local contexts. For instance, we're helping to equip teachers, school leaders, and parents with the skills that they need to integrate learners with disabilities into education systems, including empowering school principals to support greater disability inclusion in their schools. A recent UNICEF study shows that half the kids with disabilities in low and middle income countries don't finish school, with girls facing disproportionate challenges. So this timely study by the subcommittee can help address the need for practical solutions. And I'd like to conclude by reinforcing the critical importance of building evidence on what works to ensure that no one is left behind in education. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great timing, Mr. Faruqi. And now I would like to invite Ms. Nafisa Babu to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, honorable members of parliament. As a person with a visual impairment, I would not be here where I am today if it were not for technology. My father was blind and insisted that I do computer science as an additional subject in high school because he was convinced that technology was the key to open up possibilities for girls and boys with disabilities beyond those stereotypical career paths of if you're visually impaired, becoming a teacher or a lawyer, or if you are have a hearing impairment or intellectual disability, becoming a caterer or painter. So access to appropriate quality technologies can mean the difference between enabling and denying education for a child, enabling or denying participation in their workforce for a young adult, or enabling and denying self-reliance and social inclusion. In sub-Saharan Africa, a staggering number of children, school-age children, still remain out of school and are denied their right to quality education due to system-level challenges such as not there being enough schools or qualified or motivated teachers, or their schooling is disrupted due to conflict or climate change. The situation is even more dire for children with disabilities. Compared to children without disabilities, children with disabilities are, according to UNICEF, 49% more likely to have never attended school and 42% less likely to have the foundational reading and numeracy skills that are needed. They are also most often excluded for science and technology and engineering and mathematics subjects that are hindering their ability to be skilled for the 21st century and attain dignified work. Technology offers a lifeline, a real lifeline for millions of learners with disabilities. Through accessible technology, barriers such as not having an accessible textbook or a physical textbook that needs to be transported and printed can be overcome. It's heartening, very heartening to see how major tech producers are embracing universal design, acknowledging that accessibility is not just a necessity for some, but useful for everyone. And the accessibility regulations enacted by legislators like yourselves can actually now have a big impact at scale in developing countries. Let me tell you about a groundbreaking initiative in Burkina Faso, spearheaded by Light for the World and its partners. This visionary project harnesses technology to operationalize the Marrakesh Treaty. And this treaty is a pact that loosens copyright restraints for visually impaired and print-disabled people. The goal is really simple, but yet very profound. It is to ensure seamless access to learning material through technology. And if we can succeed in one of the world's least resourced countries, there is no doubt in my mind that this can be replicated globally. In Burkina Faso, most students with visual impairment are actually in mainstream schools, and they are supported by a school and resource center established by the Organization for Persons with Visual Impairment in that country. Through the project, we have upskilled the center to use more efficient methods to convert handouts and assessments into accessible formats. And to lighten the load of the resource center, we've trained up both teachers and students in creating accessible content and accessing more books using their Android devices. Tablets and laptops and affordable devices with solar chargers were distributed and accompanied by the creation of multimedia training material that meets the UNESCO ICT teacher competency framework requirements. However, more time, resources are needed to take this to scale, and also more research for the proof of concept. And we recognize that it's really difficult for teachers, especially those who have large classes who are confined to a very rigid curriculum to support students with disabilities. However, Universal Design for Learning is a very creative teaching strategy that responds to diversity from the outset by offering multiple ways of engaging and expressing learning. Students with disabilities, they really thrive when lessons follow this UDL principles and when their disability accommodations are met. Universal Design for Learning, accessible EdTech and technologies can offer a unique solution for teachers, students with disability, and those who are unable to attend school regularly. So really making disability inclusion mandatory in all education programs funded by the Government of Canada, particularly in this emerging field of technology, can change the life trajectory of millions of girls and boys with disabilities. So I appeal to the committee to take action and make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Babu. And now I would like to invite Madame Ms. Dorothy Sharma to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Dorothy, and I'm joining you all from India. I represent the International Disability Alliance. I'm joined by my colleague and our director, Mr. Jose Vieira, who was supposed to present this testimony, but unfortunately, due to technical issues, is not able to present this himself. IDA is a global alliance of 14 global and regional organizations of persons with disabilities, or OPDs. We have been at the forefront of global advocacy on advancing the rights of all persons with disabilities. Through our membership, we have an outreach in 182 countries across the world. For all our members, education is a core area of work and continues to be a priority. While our understanding of disability-inclusive education has evolved over the past several decades, especially with the adoption of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the reality on the ground continues to be dismal. This is especially true for countries of the Global South, and my own experience based on the situation in India, as well as that of my director, Mr. Vieira, who is from Argentina, speak to the immense challenges that still prevent millions of children with disabilities from even getting to a classroom, let alone get any kind of education. It is unfortunate that Mr. Vieira is unable to share his own experience today of growing up as a blind person in Argentina, and I hope that the committee will provide an opportunity for him to share his personal testimony as well in the foreseeable future. Honorable members of the committee, as Ms. Babu said, UNICEF's data from 2022 shows that 49% of the world's 240 million children with disabilities are likely to have never attended school. This is a matter of shame as well as a huge tragedy of our times, I would say. At IDA, together with our members, we have worked on articulating what disability-inclusive education truly means through the IDA Global Report on Inclusive Educations. Members of the committee, all jurisprudence and the testimonies of leaders on inclusive education now unequivocally say that all children must learn together in their communities, and this includes children with disabilities and all kinds of disabilities. At IDA, we have also taken steps to train community organizations on disability inclusive education. Together with Education Cannot Wait and our member organization Inclusion International, we are currently implementing a project on access to education for children with disabilities in situations of emergency and protracted crisis. Together with the World Bank and UNICEF, we have also supported a study on understanding the extra costs entailed by learners with disabilities and their families to access education. Families often bear the additional costs such as that of transport, personal assistance, assistive technology, rehabilitation, etc., on their own, which further adds to the barriers that keep children with disabilities, especially those with high support needs, away from schools. Our work clearly shows that countries and governments are yet to meaningfully invest in transforming education systems for disability inclusion, especially those with intellectual and development disabilities. We cannot be doing patchwork on systems that are inherently discriminatory, and the COVID-19 pandemic proved that when under pressure, our education systems have miserably failed to prevent discrimination and exclusion of learners with disabilities. In fact, in many places, we have actually regressed and created even more segregated learning places where children with disabilities are isolated and provided with poor quality education, if at all. We need much more investment to actively change our education systems and build a culture of inclusion. However, evidence shows that investment in particular development assistance to promote disability inclusion has been significantly low. Data from before the pandemic shows that aid projects actively targeting disability inclusion was as low as 0.5% of all international aid. This figure potentially is even lower now given the economic downturn and budget cuts. In this context, we are extremely encouraged by the House of Commons taking up this issue. We urge that Canada play a leading role globally on the issue of disability inclusive transformation of our education systems that are accessible and equitable for all learners with disabilities, including those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. To do that, we need to work on many fronts. We have to progressively increase budgetary allocations for disability inclusive education towards being at least 5% of education budgets. They should also apply to ODA and development grants. countries must set medium and long-term targets to ensure all learners with disabilities are reached in all education programs. But above all, we must work on supporting and strengthening community-based organizations of persons with disabilities, including families, to understand their rights, to understand what they must demand from their governments. True change will only happen when people themselves are empowered to drive the change they would like to see in their own communities. Members of this esteemed committee, the International Disability Alliance stands ready to support this House in their efforts to advance disability inclusive education for all learners with disabilities. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma. And now, excuse me, I have to suspend for a few seconds because we have a new witness who just joined us in order to do the sound test. Couple of seconds, please. And now I would like to invite Madame Olga Abulghaib to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. My name is Ola Abulghaib. I'm the lead technical lead for the Fund on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Our fund is unique because it provides funding to governments to move ahead in terms of their commitments on the implementation on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Convention, including Article 24 on education and SDG 4 on ensuring inclusive education and equality of education for all learners across their life cycle. Our fund has been already implementing programs in 87 countries. Our approach to providing funding is really making sure that national level programs, systems, and policies are inclusive to rights of persons with disabilities, including children with disabilities. The CRPD is very clear about what must be done to achieve quality inclusive education for all. Children with disabilities must be included in general education systems and have access to reasonable accommodation and the support services and measures they require. Member states must take action to ensure all children with disabilities have access and skills they need to be included through the provisions of Braille Sign Language interpretation, availability of appropriately trained teachers and staff. We understand from our work across the globe that there is a lot of commitment to inclusive education. However, there are very significant challenges still on the ground for children with disabilities to access education. We have heard colleagues on the existing statistics that are unfortunately showcasing that still the reality on the ground is not meeting the ambition that the global world have committed to around access to education for children with disabilities. We know for a fact that fundamental changes are required to achieve inclusive education. This is why UNBRBD programs focus on delivering system change at national level. For example, UNBRBD Fund is currently working to revise legislation to ensure non-discrimination, accessibility, and the provision of support services, and building the capacity of education system across the education era in Colombia, the Dominican Republic of Congo, and Vietnam. We're also delivering a multi-country program in Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe to develop understanding of stigma and discrimination in technical and vocational training and training institutions and among employers as well. As the subcommittee will be aware, it's also vital to consider how broader issues impacting education should be tackling disability equally. As world leaders have been convening at COP28, we must also consider how climate change threatens education system, and specifically its implication on children with disabilities. We know that climate disasters disrupts access to education and damage education infrastructure. And unfortunately, we already witness on the ground that many children with disabilities are impacted from this situation. Building connection between climate action and education is vital for achieving transformative change. But it's vital to remember that children and adults with disabilities are hugely impacted by climate change and the mitigation measures designed to minimize the impact. So their rights must be prioritized within that space as well. Finally, as colleagues heard from fellows witnesses last week, there is a major issue around underinvestment in education and inclusive education specifically. But this is not related only to education. This reflects chronic underinvestment in disability and development more broadly. According to OECD DAC marker, 90% of development aid does not consider persons with disabilities, and only 0 to 27% have disability as its main focus. Awareness of disability rights has grown since 2006, but this has not been backed up by finance or action. Sustained investment is required to achieve lasting change.
Can you please wrap it out because time is off?
Of course. Governments must urgently translate their commitments to concrete actions and investment. That's why today's discussion is very vital for us all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Al-Bughaib, and nice welcoming you. Even you come late, we are lucky to have you today. And for all our witnesses, thanks for your good comments of this morning. And now we would like to pass for questions and answer with the member of the subcommittee. I would like to start by inviting Mr. Lake to take the floor for 7 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for the testimony. I'm going to start with, I think I'll start with Doroti and Nafisa. It's a fairly basic question. Everybody almost mentioned the stats, the UNICEF stats that talk about how unincluded kids are. 49% more likely to have never attended school. When you think of those populations, young kids, 7, 8, 9 years old, who we just take for granted here in Canada that all kids at that age would be included in school. It's hard for us to kind of understand a circumstance where that might not be the case. Why in different parts of the world, particularly the parts of the world that you referenced, would kids not be included in school at 6, 7, 8 years old with disabilities? What would be the factors that would lead to that?
Nafisa, would you like to go first, and then maybe I add? Okay, I'll do that. Thank you, Mike, for that question. The reality is there's a lot of stigma and shame around disability, and families still hide their children, and they're not really aware that their kids have the right to go to school. I think that is one of the main reasons. We also see that people are, and then also schools are not very accepting of children who are different. And often they would reject the child, or they will say they need additional support. And so it's not uncommon for us to even see children who are 19 in their 20s first for going to school for the first time. And that's often students with intellectual disability, with a hearing impairment, and that is, or with a vision impairment in very rural communities. And the reality is it's about information. The information hasn't reached them. There hasn't been enough sensitization around this in that community, but this can change with social behavioral change initiatives.
Thanks. Dorothy?
Thank you. Adding to what Nafisa said, I think there are a multitude of factors that really affect
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le
children.
Président. Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order. I'm being told that the microphones in the room should be turned off so that the interpreters do not have any problems.
Please mute yourself.
Thank you. If I may go ahead and answer that question of Mr. Lake. I come from a very small town in the northeastern part of India. So I can talk to you about my own experiences and that of my family members who have children with disabilities. Like Nafisa said, most of the times people are not even aware that their child has a right to education. And a child goes to school at 4 years of age. Between 0 to 4 years, there's hardly any intervention available for most families to even understand how their child can be prepared to attend regular schools. So while children without disabilities have access to, going to a playground, a prep school, or some with the resource and knowledge have access to rehabilitation, the getting ready to school programs do not exist in many countries, and people are not really aware of that, of the importance of that. And then even if one overcomes all of those challenges and reaches the school, schools either ask you to not come, or then ask you to provide for all the additional costs. Families have lost incomes. Families have had to build ramps. Families have had to beg and plead to make sure that classrooms are never changed for children with disabilities. And I'm not even talking about those with intellectual and development disabilities here, because because children with development and intellectual disabilities are not even accorded that opportunity, that small slide door that is open for others. I don't think that even opens for children with intellectual disabilities in our parts of the countries, at least. And I think that's an important issue to consider. And global leaders like Canada has really a role to play in ensuring that when we are supporting education programs in such countries, we ensure that we are doing no harm by reinforcing those barriers. Thank you so much.
Ola, do you want to weigh in on this as well? What are the causes to kids being unincluded at ages like 6 and 7 and 8?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can relate to that from so many of the countries that we are working in. The main issue is that the failure of the system to respond to the rights of children with disabilities. And it's a quite complex, interconnected issue that we are facing, because access to education doesn't only entail being able to enroll in a school and go to school. It's all about the infrastructure being ready. In many of the places, there is no accessible transport. The issue of access to assistive technology. Many children does not have the proper assistive devices to allow them to move around, to communicate, to function as other students. The access to health system as well, to enable them to be healthy, to be able to be productive whenever they are in the schools. Also, teacher education. All the support system of the education in many countries is lacking. It's about awareness. It's about the acknowledgement of the governments that that children with disabilities have the equal right to access education, but it's also the other support services around those children where many families are struggling, to afford it, but also in many countries it does not exist. We are talking about simple measures that are still not in place, unfortunately, and that's why children with disabilities are still paying the price. I can also just briefly give you the example where we operate in humanitarian contexts. Unfortunately, even though with the immediate measures that are usually put in place for children in general to get back to education system, whether in the same country or the displaced country, we are witnessing now the example in Ukraine, where families who decided to flee to other countries, they are not able to connect their children with disabilities to this education system. So we need to have that comprehensive understanding of why the failure of the system is still not working. And confirming what my colleague Dorothy said, Canada has a major role to play to be one of the pioneers of the countries collaborating with governments as well, because that is the center of the discussion of governments making that genuine, real commitment to those changes happening in new commitments around development or humanitarian context.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Et maintenant, j'invite M. Zoubairi de prendre la parole.
Now, Mr. Zubairi, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank all the witnesses for being with us today.
Important study around disability, and it's a timely study also. I'd like to talk about or ask some questions around what is in the news today, and in particular around conflict, and to have to deepen our understanding of disability education with the nexus of conflict. And I'd like to start with the witness who finished her remarks last, Ms. Abul Ghaib. I know that you have expertise in different parts of the world, and you have worked on countries, several countries, 70-odd countries. Currently, with the conflict in Gaza, according to UN agencies, over 15,000 people have lost their lives and many others are missing, 75% of whom are women and children. We are hearing reports about crush wounds, people being pulled from out of under rubble and destroyed buildings, that there is intense need for medical care. Can you comment on how in this type of situation where there is urban warfare and civilians are within the urban areas, what do you expect will be the outcomes with respect to children with disability, and you can touch upon education too, but what do you expect the future outcomes to be as we hopefully exit this conflict?
Thank you so much for this question. I mean, as you have rightly said, following the news, unfortunately, the situation happening in Gaza right now is appalling in terms of loss of lives and impact on well-being of thousands and thousands of people over there, including children and including children with disabilities. From working in Palestine as the fund before the crisis, unfortunately, children with disabilities usually and adults with disabilities are usually the most impacted, whether it is the onset of the crisis as we are facing now, because you can see that people are requested to move around, even being evacuated, being forced to be in situations that are in many cases not with any basic human being needs. And when thinking about children with disabilities and adults, that's of course massively more impacting their access to health and basic services, that without them, their life is under threat. Now, when it comes to the looking beyond this overwhelming situation in the context, we as the fund is already starting to think through what can be done, to ensure that basic services that is provided to those populations are inclusive to the rights and needs of persons with disabilities, including children. And when it comes to education, what we have witnessed in the past through the UN action collectively is to make sure when there is a rebuilding of schooling, for example, it needs to be attentive to ensure that those schools environments are inclusive to children with disabilities. When it comes to health systems and rehabilitation, we know, as you rightly said, many children unfortunately lost their lives, but many also are now ending up with permanent disabilities that will impact their functionality, their well-being, but also access to education. So the whole system around health, rehabilitation, assistive technology is essential at this moment to be thought through to ensure that children, when ready to go back to school, they are able to access the right support services that they are needed. And we're all hopeful that once the moment is ready for us to intervene, we will be able to respond and act. Unfortunately, our hands are tight right now because the situation is quite complex, but we are also starting the discussions of seeing what can we do once things are ready to re-establish the support system and environment for all those kids and adults with disabilities.
Thank you. Could I ask a follow-up? In terms of UNRWA, would you say that UNRWA will be a key actor in ensuring that children with disabilities are receiving proper education in the Gaza Strip and occupied West Bank?
Well, look, yeah, definitely. I mean, UNRWA plays a major role in terms of its support to the education system. Other agencies also play a role, like UNICEF, UNESCO, are also key in terms of providing that support usually in the previous years. But also I must confirm also the role of other UN agencies like WHO as well to make sure that the rehabilitation and access to health services are in place as well. And UNDP also plays a major role in terms of ensuring that infrastructure work is also inclusive and available to those children. So the collective, what we do as a fund is make sure there is a collective effort of one UN approach that responds to a crisis. And we have done already the same now in Ukraine, and it has been showing a lot of effectiveness.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Je suis désolé d'interrompre.
Point of order. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Whenever microphones are on in the room at the same time that the interpreters are working, and particularly when we have people appearing via Zoom, it complicates the task for our interpreters. Please, for occupational health and safety concerns, pay attention.
Pass, please.
Thank you. And I'm assuming my time was paused, so I still have at least a minute left. I'd like to ask a question around the obligation of occupying powers. And there are many instances in which regions of the world, including the occupied Palestinian territories, Ukraine, etc., there are obligations that occupying powers have with respect to the occupied. When it comes to the covenants around children and around disability, what are those obligations? Maybe to Madame Paré or any other witness. Madame Paré.
Excuse me, Madame Paré, I will give you a chance next time because time is over for Mr. Zubairi, sorry. Et maintenant, j'aimerais inviter Monsieur...
Now I will call on Mr. Alexis Brunel-Duceppe to take the floor. 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for participating in this very important study, which we hope will produce something concrete as we look into the situation of disabled children on the international scene. I imagine that if we want to be credible on this matter, we must do our work internally. You said rightfully, and many other witnesses said, that children with disabilities is not a homogeneous group. And on that note, I would let you look back a bit. There was a 2006 report by Ottawa Francophones with Disabilities, by the Ottawa Francophone Assembly and the Francophone Partnership. And the discussion group reported that even if services for young Francophones with disabilities have excellent services. It's not obvious. If others are having good services, it's not the same for Francophone children. Do you think the situation has evolved? Specifically, I'm talking about Francophone children outside Quebec. Are you talking about children with learning disabilities in particular? Yes. And after that, I imagine that there are also other children with disabilities. Yes, I talked about many families with children in that situation. And from what I understand, the situation has not improved. There's a serious problem of access to services. Many families turn to the private sector. Some go to Quebec. People living towards the north of Ontario have to come to Ottawa because there are more resources in Ottawa. Access where they are resident is difficult. Some families also turn towards more specialized services. For example, we have the Jules Léger Center here in Ottawa for children with severe learning disabilities, and they only take 40 students. As a result, there's an entire process to apply to enter those centers. So it's not all the children who need those services will be able to get them. So there's still a problem of access to services. Question: I think there are some 20 such services for children with severe physical and other disabilities. In a research that you did and published in 2007, you visited a center in the National Capital Region that managed 6 classes. In those 6 classrooms, how many of them were Francophones? Because a parent had complained about that. Yes, that was the case. So you need to complain through the media to be able to have access if you have children with severe disabilities. When it comes to specialized education and children with disabilities, a lot works through complaints. That's how families receive services. There is no direct access that is easy for everyone. That is definitely against inclusive education. That is one of the things that you said during your initial remarks. But the long-term impact for Francophone children on Radio Canada who need those services, what is the long-term impact? It's lack of access to education like any other kid. The fact that the objectives, provincial laws are not respected for all children. Thank you. Let's turn abroad. But you caught my attention when you said that the approach should not be homogeneous because the groups are not the same. Could you say more by giving maybe examples of a bad approach and an example of a good approach? Talking about inclusive education, this is a philosophy, an excellent philosophy if it can be implemented. But the problem is that we don't have the services, we don't have resources for it to work. So we find ourselves in situations I've heard about. Children with intellectual disabilities find themselves in ordinary classrooms. They spend their times in the corridors. They are asked to photocopy things. They don't receive the same quality of education, even though they are in the ordinary classroom, the so-called inclusive education that is not necessarily inclusive. Now, on the international scene, when we find ourselves with problems within the country, do you think that Canada is a major player abroad? Should it play a significant role? And if that is the case, is it able to do its own job? Internationally, we have 2 obligations. The obligation to implement the conventions within our territory and also obligations towards international cooperation. So in that sense, we have to be a major player. Canada has the capacity to be so when it comes to human rights. So I see two things: resources for international development. What do we invest in education particularly? The figures are very low. Well, I will not insist on that. I've met with many organizations that work on international development. And when we are told that Canada has great policies, including its international feminist policy, but the budget that is allocated for international development is very low, whereas the UN asks countries like Canada to invest more. Many other countries of the OECD are investing more. So under the Liberal government, we are far below what the previous Conservative government did under Stephen Harper. So this definitely has an impact. To what extent does this have an impact on the programs by Canada abroad? This underfunding.
I'm finished. I give you 25 seconds, please.
On n'a jamais été à 0.7%.
We have never been at 0.7%. We provide resources, but we are not able to implement our own programs.
And now I would like to invite Ms. McPherson to take the floor for 7 minutes, please.
Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us for this very, very important study. I'm going to follow up on some of the questions that my colleague from the bloc has just asked with regards to development dollars, because there's two things I'm interested in that I'd like some information on. One is data and data collection, and one is on how we are allocating resources. Because I think what we heard from everyone is that there needs to be more commitment, more resources allocated to inclusive education, and I would argue development writ large. And similar to what my colleague just mentioned, you know, Canada has the commitment to 0.7% actually came from Lester B. Pearson. It is a Canadian commitment we've never met under any government. We're very far from it right now. The impacts of COVID on our international development funding mean that this year was in fact a 15% cut to our ODA. So we're not even heading in the right direction. So I'd really like to hear perhaps from you, Ms. Perret, but also from our colleagues from the United Nations Partnership on the Rights of People with Disabilities and from the Light for the World representatives on, you know, how do we start this conversation and get the Canadian government to recognize that there needs to be a bigger investment in development dollars for education, for inclusive education, but for development writ large? Perhaps I'd start in the room with you, Ms. Perret.
Thank you. I think that, yeah, there's two things. There's the number, you know, how much of our PNB, of our Produit National Brut, GNP is how much goes to international development and how much of that goes to education. And from what I saw, the part that goes to education out of 8 sectors, it's the number 6. And knowing that education should really be the number 1 investment, I think this is... Everybody agrees that this is the most, I hope so, that's the most important thing for children to be able to, you know, build in successful societies and for them to be successful in life. And maybe I missed part of your question.
No, and I would just highlight, too, that we do have a feminist international assistance policy, and we have been told we have a feminist foreign policy that nobody has yet seen. But the idea that these are core principles, knowing that women and girls are disproportionately impacted, if you would like to comment on that.
Yes. And I think Canada does play a great role, and especially with the gender-based analysis that is now mainstreamed. And we saw that it is important also with the education of children with disabilities, with the intersectionalities and so on. I would say that it's also important to bring in other human rights aspects into that analysis to make it more intersectional and to include disability, and so more of a human rights-based approach. I would say using human rights-based approach tools to make sure that the programs we put in place and we finance everywhere are inclusive of children with disabilities, among others.
Well, and that is part of the Official Development Assistance Act that is law in this country, is that we are meant to be using human rights as the lens through which we look at our development work. Perhaps I could pass the microphone off to those online if anyone else would like to contribute to those comments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this very vital question. I mean, there is definitely an opportunity for Canada to stand out in terms of pioneering of what is meant in terms of investment on inclusive development and inclusive education. What we see from working towards increased investment on disability more broadly, the main issue with government investment is that it has this specific small allocations of pots of money that goes into disability, which is vitally needed. However, it's not the case across its broader investment. And that is what we need. On disability, it's been very clear that we need to adopt this cross approach where we are looking into mainstreaming investments to be inclusive. And there is a lot of learning on Canada's approach on that, on gender more broadly, and we need to see that happening. As I was indicating, investments on climate change, investments on the care agenda, investments on gender equality more broadly, needs to see where disability is embedded into that, because that's the only way we can transform the whole development thinking to be inclusive. And as I indicated earlier, inclusive education to be foreseen in many countries across the globe needs to be looked at more broadly. It's cross-sectorial approach. So more broader investment to be inclusive, the more we see children with disabilities enjoying their rights and access to education as others in those countries. Thank you.
Ms. McPherson, I have Ms. Sharma. It seems to be she would like to intervene for your question. Sharma, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the time again. I would just want to reiterate that, human rights are indivisible. So we cannot really distinguish human rights between different identity groups. As Ola already said, that we have to look at intersectionality, and we do commend Canada for having a feminist approach towards foreign policy. A feminist approach towards foreign policy cannot exclude women and girls with disabilities, and I think that's important for all of us to really take note here. I also would like to draw the attention of the honourable members of this committee and the House to the commitments that Canada made at the Global Disability Summit in 2022, where it committed to providing greater assistance to persons with disabilities in developing countries, including through international development assistance programming. I think that Canada is a leader, and we in international development programming that works on human rights, that works on intersectionality, and we'd really like to see that continue. And we'd really like to see Canada being a champion of disability inclusion across the world. Thank you so much.
Ms. McPherson, I have Ms. Babu. You have 35 minutes. Can I give her the floor?
35 seconds probably, but yes, that would be wonderful.
35 seconds, sorry, sir.
Thank you. And what I want to add is that we really need to make sure that disability inclusion is a core criterion for accessing development assistance for any program, be it on education, be it on health. This needs to be institutionalized. I think it's really important to take inspiration from USAID and other countries who have really gotten champions internally to focus on disability inclusion, to spearhead it internally, to ensure institutional kind of transformation around this and create awareness. And I think that is one of the key steps to take and ensure that people are aware and champion this cause across all development assistance programs.
Thank you, Ms. Babu. Mr. Faruqi, you have the floor. I give you 1 minute, please, quickly.
Just on the question about feminist assistance policy and the importance of girls' education, I wanted to intervene briefly on that because we know so many girls are out of school, and the challenge of getting them back into school. I wanted to point to one of our programs in Nigeria and Sierra Leone, which is sort of a boot camp for girls who are out of school to get them foundational literacy and numeracy skills. And we're doing that at a fraction of the cost of achieving numeracy and literacy in the formal school system. And in fact, when they get back into school, they do better than the kids that were in the formal school system, and it's being scaled up there. Mr. President, if you allow me, I have a couple of observations on some of the previous questions. Do I have any time to respond?
Another minute, please. What?
Okay. Yeah,
we are limited.
Thank you so much. Mr. Lake, your question about why so many kids that are, 7 or 8 are not, being helped when they have disability. I think the point about early interventions is so important because either you don't know that they have disabilities early on, or by the time they're 7 or 8, it's kind of too late. They've kind of dropped out of the system. So I wanted to come back to my point of the importance of pre-primary. I mean, we don't normally have JK in developing countries, but one of our innovations is scaling a 10-week program in the summer that kind of gets the benefits of JK, but also, as I said, helps these community centers identify kids with disabilities early on so that they can be supported. And I think that's really important. In Uganda, in fact, the government is using this set of community-based preschools as their collection point, data collection point, holistically, but also for kids with disabilities. And on the point about refugee populations, I just wanted to say briefly that one part of the solution is tech, but it's not just tech. So we have a program that we profiled at International Women's Day at the UN last year, which is game-based learning. And it works without internet. And we're finding that the scores for math increased by 50%, and that girls caught up to boys within 5 months. But the real importance...
Can you wrap it up, please?
Yeah, just the real importance there, I think, is that when the kids are out of school, then, referring to the kind of programs that I did before, because, of course, in often in refugee environments are not in school. So relying on those innovations that can get them back in school and using game-based learning can be very effective. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Maintenant, je reviens à vous, Madame Paré. Il faut être juste.
Now I'll come back to you, Miss Paré, because you didn't get a chance to respond to Mr. Zubari's question. You have 1 minute.
Occupying powers, and so in international law, any group that has the effective control of a territory has the same obligations on the territory as would have a legitimate government or the state itself that would normally control the territory. So that means international human rights law would apply, as well as obviously international humanitarian law.
Merci, Madame Paré.
Thank you, Ms. Paré.
To take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Allow me to start off by thanking all of the witnesses for their time and for the expertise. It's proven very, very helpful hearing from each of you. So I wanted to start off with the issue that obviously there are many, many gaps. There's no questions about that. But one thing I found that was very, very alarming was a study by UNESCO in 2020, which said to the extent that countries have adopted laws to allow for inclusive education, only 3% of those countries have made provisions for training teachers. It would seem to me that that's a very important and significant aspect of this. So if I could start off with Professor Paré. Are there legal impediments that are getting in the way of allowing countries to include teacher training as part of their strategy to pave the way for inclusive education?
I don't believe that there are legal impediments. I could just talk simply about what's happening in Ontario. So we have right now close to a third of the students in classrooms who have what we call individual education plans. A third of the students. However, nothing has changed in the classroom. So you still have one teacher with 30 students, and so the teachers have growing obligations there to cater to the very individual needs of every student. But the training hasn't changed. So we don't have the teachers don't feel that they don't have the training to do that, which means that a lot of children would then just fall through the cracks, even though they do have the plan. So on paper, it looks good, but in practice, it doesn't. So I believe the situation must be very similar in countries that do have legislation, because legislation, we have it, but then the practice is different, and the practice includes, a lack of training.
For sure, absolutely. And then, Mr. Farugi, I believe in your opening remarks, you were talking about how you do work with teachers. So how difficult is it to interface with teachers? Does your organization generally first interface with national authorities and then through them? Are you allowed to interface with teachers? How does that process work, and how difficult is it proven to be?
Actually, on the program that we're funding, which is called the Knowledge and Innovation Exchange, we bring together stakeholders in countries, so ministries of education, teacher training institutes, teacher unions, and that sort of thing, and really the important stakeholders with the researchers and the innovators to kind of identify together what the problems are, to ensure that whatever the solutions are quickly taken up. And so we're not actually finding it difficult in that sense. It's a formal approach. Right now, I saw a statistic that there's 62 million teachers worldwide that don't have enough training. And the challenge is not just training them, it's training them at scale in a way that's cost-effective and efficient. So we have a program called Teacher Professional Development at Scale, which is using online systems, but also adapting them to the local context and then preparing open educational resources that are available to all. So we're finding that quite effective, but as Mona said, the challenges are great because there's all this technology. How do I teach tech? Because you can't just give one laptop per child if you don't teach the teachers how to teach it to the kids. How do you support kids with IEPs, right? So that's another issue. So this is probably the critical success factor, the single critical success factor for improving disability inclusive education. Really important.
Thank you. And this is open to any other witnesses. To the extent that we are talking about the need to scale expertise and to train teachers, is there any particular jurisdiction around the world that sticks out for their ability to actually make the necessary investments and devote the resources to have teachers at the forefront of this? Is there any jurisdiction that sticks out, in the opinion of any of you? Yes, I believe.
Ms. Babu, please.
Thank you. I'm not sure about jurisdiction, what is meant by that, but what I do think is really vital. Teachers are the bedrock of inclusive education, particularly disability inclusive education, and we really need to invest in not just developing teacher training curriculum that speaks to universal design for learning and gets teachers to understand that you can teach all children in the classroom, and you need to prepare for that from the outset, right? I think that's really vital that general education teachers get this training, and it's part of their continuous professional development. It's embedded into the pre-service training of teachers. But often I find that teacher training institutions, they are often still stuck in old ways of working. And the request is, or the ask is often from special needs departments to now lead on disability inclusive education. And I think that it's quite a big turn for them to take, right? From the belief that students should be treated in a special way, in special classes, to say they should be in an inclusive setting. So I think that there really needs to be a lot of
Can you please wrap it up? We exceed
coaching. Coaching and investment in teacher training to make it all inclusive, and also invest in specializations for teachers so that they can support, specialized teachers can support other teachers, in particular in developing countries.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite Mr. Lake to take the floor for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a great conversation, but I find that the conversation today is similar to many conversations around disability inclusive education, where we get talking about intersectionality, which is really important, but intersectionality can't mean solving every problem in the world as we're trying to have a conversation around disability inclusive education. So when we start throwing climate change and talking about the intersectionality around climate change, yeah, fair, there's an impact there, but we're not going to solve, we can't wait to deal with disability inclusive education until we solve climate change. And, so I want to get back to sort of what do we do now, in a world where kids are not included in school, in many cases because of some of the issues we've talked about, for example, stigma, those kind of issues. I take a look at that and I go, there are things that we can do right now to help deal with stigma, right? We can help. The call to action on disability inclusive education talks about supporting education systems to use the Washington Group Child Functioning Model. I know Doroti, I know Nafisa, you are involved in the conversations around the call to action. This is a functioning module that allows people, experts on the ground, cost effectively to go out and assess disability. Once you've assessed disability and functioning, you can actually give families a neurodevelopmental explanation for what that disability is. So you start to explain it so you reduce stigma because there's an explanation for the community. And now you can start to find ways to include, whether it's training teachers on inclusion methods for the kids that are affected or whatever the case may be. So specifically to Doroti and Nafisa, because I know that you were intimately involved in the creation of the call to action. Can I just ask you, those first steps that we can take, if we really want to impatiently take action on disability inclusion in schools, maybe speak to what that call to action would point us to, either. So
thank you, Mr. Lake, and thank you also for referring to the call to action. It was launched last year at the Transforming Education Summit. The call, and before I get into some of the actions that we can take right now, I would really also urge Canada to endorse this, and also parliamentarians in Canada to be champions for this call to action, because it's truly a document that lays out a direction, a path for advancing disability inclusive education. As you rightly pointed out, data has been an issue. We still don't have reliable and comparable data on disability and on disability desegregation, which is why many of our interventions are often not adequate on the ground, because data informs those policies. And I think to that point, Canada's, and I can speak to the international development context, so Canada's development assistance on education must therefore include data disaggregation and targets for reaching learners with disabilities through those programs that they support. We would also really call on Canada to adopt a twin track approach, and this also speaks to the point that Mr. Lake made just now as he began his remarks. So twin track approach really says that we not only need to invest in making the overall education system inclusive, but we also have to invest in specialized services that are required for learners with disabilities to be able to come to school and access education on an equal basis with others. I think setting criteria, setting indicators and targets that are monitored and tracked over time, and ensuring that reliable and comparable data is collected are two steps that Canada can definitely take through its international development assistance programs. Additionally, I think there is also a need for awareness generation, and we need to talk more and more about disability inclusive transformation, and we need champions, and we need Canada to be a leader on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nafisa, do you want to weigh in on that as well?
Thank you, Mike.
Nafisa, quickly, we have a 25 seconds only, please.
Thank you. It is very important to really set a target and put that in a policy and a strategy. And I think if the government of Canada can do that as a starting point, and then track progress towards it with set goals, annual and biannual goals, I think that we can really make a step change. So I really challenge the government of Canada to take that first step, a bold step with a policy and a strategy, and setting targets around disability inclusion based on the call to action. Thank you.
Thank you.
J'aimerais inviter Monsieur Alexis Boulin.
I would like to call on Mr. Alexis Brunel-Duceppe to take the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to quickly conclude with Ms. Perry, as I started before. Just to understand, when Francophone parents don't have access to services, is it possible that they turn towards English services? Yes, it's very common for Francophone families to turn to English language services, which also poses a problem of understanding. Because of problems of understanding, the services may not exactly be what the families were looking for. Very quickly, on the other hand, in Quebec, for Anglophones in Quebec, do they have the same challenges? As far as you know, I cannot answer that question. Thank you. Mr. Faruqi, let's look at what is happening abroad. Is Canada funding programs destined for children with disabilities abroad? Do we have data to know the percentage of those programs that are intended for Francophone children abroad? I'm not sure I have exact figures, but the OECD has supported Francophone countries. I know that we support Francophone countries. We have an office in Dakar. There are trends in that region, and we support many projects there. About 50% of our budget goes to sub-Saharan Africa. The West Africa region is well represented. Looking at education, we support programs that are tied to the training of teachers, as I mentioned, gender equity and inclusion, and also teaching in bilingual and multilingual programs. Cameroon could be a good example because Cameroon has 2 official languages, even though they have many other languages. So I imagine that's a good example of how we could work. It's more challenging for teachers, including students. And in India, there is a hub that encourages or lists educators who can talk to parents to share their knowledge, to share what works and what doesn't work when it comes to improving education. There are 21 countries of West Africa that participate in this program. If you would allow me, there's no good answer or bad answer. We are simply trying to improve the situation. Maybe you don't have the answer. I'm thinking about North Kivu. It's in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but near Rwanda. How difficult is it for organizations like yours to reach children, particularly children with disabilities living in such areas? How dangerous is it for the people working for your organization? Very good question. As you know, in our program, we work in 80 countries in the world. A great proportion of those countries are countries that are threatened by war. And even the examples I gave you, some of our programs that work can be found in Chad, in Uganda, and in countries where we are implementing our programs. We do what we can. Sometimes we look for border countries. We get neighboring countries to study what is happening in the other countries. Thank you.
I would like to invite Madame McPherson to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to all the witnesses. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into how data is collected. So we have heard from witnesses to the committee on this study already that the failure of good data has impacted the ability to implement good programming. Perhaps I'd start with you, Mr. Faruqi. What are the ways that we can ensure that data is happening better, that it is more effectively being gathered, and what are the barriers to that data being collected? What is stopping us from being able to gather that data? And then just one more I'll throw on there as well is, I've recently been reading about how women often don't appear in data. They don't. They're invisible in data oftentimes. How can we ensure that that's not the case as we collect data with regards to this issue?
Really great question. And, it goes sort of beyond the education field. I mean, data is one of those things that just doesn't seem as sexy to kind of focus on, but it's critical, right? So when we're talking about kids with disabilities, if, just like you said, with women, violence against women, other topics, if you're not collecting data on it, then the issue is invisible. So we have a specific focus, and some of our calls have focused on this issue of data around educational management information systems. Right now, as I mentioned, we're actually supporting UNICEF to integrate data on kids with disabilities into the broader data systems that they have on education. We're working to link things like health and education data. So, for instance, during COVID, by doing that, then you could identify where you might need to make specific interventions, where schools are closed, and so forth, because of the data. What's stopping it? I think part of it is a tendency that we all like big ribbon cutting ceremonies with projects that are actually, you have infrastructure and it's sort of very visible what you're doing. And data is, like I said, less sexy, but it's but it's less critical. So I think that's one of the things that's stopping it. It may be that some of the systems themselves, the actual software and so forth, needs to be better integrated and made more efficient, so you have open systems that are transparent, that people can access and so forth. Those are some of the obstacles, but it's an absolutely critical issue. Yeah.
I wonder, too, if we are looking at a situation where we have very limited funds available, collecting data is a resource, requires resources to do that. And if you have limited funds, perhaps organizations choose to devote those funds to that inclusive education rather than the data. Is that possible?
I think that's possible, but, for a long time we've had an open data for development program, and one of the benefits of all of these technological changes that we're seeing is it's a lot cheaper to set up systems for collecting data using innovative methods. It's not, the idea of kind of doing these big surveys, doing everything by hand, getting them into the systems, I think it's not as challenging as it was before. So that's maybe a hopeful sign for better using our scarce dollars for education.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I see that we have some colleagues online that would like to contribute.
Yes, Madam. Ms. Abulgaid, please.
Yeah, on the data element, it's really very critical to understand that there are two sets of data that we really need from country level to give us the understanding of what the landscape on disability and access to inclusive education is. We know that things are improving quite a bit at national level from the program we're supporting across the globe when it comes to national formal data, which is the national census. The use of the Washington Group questions have been actually being taken on board more now with many governments. However, we are still lacking the administrative data, which is the school system data that gives us the understanding annually what is the performance, what are we missing in terms of inclusion of children with disabilities within that. There is also the risk in many countries where there is another set of data that's completely missing, which is the special education schools. And those are, and unfortunately, the biggest, I would say, failure of the system, that we are not capturing in the data more mainstreamly. And to your point about investment versus reality, the only thing we see it working at country level is the collaborative effort. Usually working on data and disability and education and other access to services, it is a sketchy approach and usually goes in silos. So we need to make sure that Canada's support, for example, it's highly recommended on data more broadly, makes sure that it is captured collectively at national level. So there is a deeper understanding on how actually the reality on the ground for children with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Abul Gaib. Now I would like to invite Mr. Zubairi to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to ask if you can elaborate a bit upon poverty and how poverty accents the challenges around disability and education. It'll open up to any witness who can give us some detail on this question. Feel free to jump in. Yes, please.
Look, it's definitely very essential. The point I was making at the beginning about looking at disability from the comprehensive cross-sectorial approach. The impact of poverty is highly influential in terms of families' decisions of where resources should go. And unfortunately, in many cases, the drop-off opportunities for their children with disabilities to go to school is the one to be prioritized. The reason is because we know that in many countries, the social protection systems are not inclusive to disability more broadly. The benefit system are not adjusted when there are members with disabilities, children with disabilities in the household that needs that additional cost of disability is never considered. The high cost of transport of assistive devices that is not covered by the benefit system in the country, all of that considered, unfortunately, have a high impact on the choice of parents whether to bring their children to school or not, especially in remote areas or in situations of conflict. Thank you.
And in addition, just as a follow-up, aside from poverty, would you say there are any one or two key issues that accentuate the problems when it comes to this study?
I mean, one key thing is really to know that we know what needs to happen at national level in terms of systems to be inclusive to children with disabilities. Article 24 was clear. There was a clear technical global understanding of what is needed. What we are missing is three elements. One is the political commitments from governments towards it, and I believe Canada can play a major role on that. The second one is the investment. And the third one is increasing the capacities of all stakeholders, including teachers, ministers, officials that works in the system. So without those three things, unfortunately, all what we are discussing today will continue to be lacking. We know evidence is still missing, but we know that we have enough knowledge that the system is failing children with disabilities. But as I said, with no further investment, with no looking at it from a comprehensive approach, with the lens of no matter any commitment comes on board to development or humanitarian context, is looking at those children with disabilities, well-beings, access to services, and specifically education, we will unfortunately come back to this discussion again a few years from now and not achieving the thing we are all here today to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you don't mind, we have Ms. Sharma would like to intervene to your request. Ms. Sharma, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I won't repeat what Ola has already said about social protection, but I do want to, bring to the notice of this House a study that UNICEF and World Bank has conducted on the additional costs of accessing education for children with disabilities. And I think countries have not taken those costs into account. And if we look at the data that is coming out from different countries, because similar researches are going on, it would be evident that to be able to afford the kind of additional costs, families with children with disabilities will have to be in the top percentile of earners of the country, and that is not the case because persons with disabilities and their families comprise 20% of the world's poorest. So that huge gap is very evident. I also want to flag the point about the lack of availability and accessibility of assistive technology here. Only 5 to 15% of those who need assistive technology actually have it. And it's not just about, availability, but it's also about affordability. We don't have quality assistive technology available, and that also really impacts and builds on the cycle of poverty and how all of these multidimensional factors prevent children from going to school, children with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Farouk, you have the floor for 1 minute maximum, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, one of the other speakers spoke about, the choices that people have to make that have scarce resources and, making choices about which kids go to school, ones with disabilities, maybe boys instead of girls, and that challenge. The other challenge I think I want to talk about in terms of poverty is kind of the subject of this committee overall. Is one aspect of poverty is lack of understanding and awareness of challenges that different groups face and seeing them as part of a neurodiverse kind of paradigm rather than disabilities or rather than something sort of backward or a gap and so forth. And I think that the response is education, right? And it is overall. I mean, even in this country, my son has a learning disability. And in grade 6, I remember the teacher said to me, well, you really should not be putting him into the college preparation programs because he's not going to succeed. And I think that it's education that changes that mindset in Canada as well as in developing countries. And that's an aspect of poverty that we need to address. He's in his second year of his grad school in international affairs now, and he did do the college programs. But I think that aspect is really, really critical for us to see this as not something sort of special needs on the side, but people who have the same capabilities as everybody else that need some level of support to succeed in society. Thanks.
And now I would like to invite Mr. Lake to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And to that vein, I often talk about, when I think about my son, the idea of mitigating challenges to unlock potential, right? Just like we all want to have our challenges, we want to help dealing with our challenges so that we can be recognizing our full potential. I'm going to focus on, as I think about inclusive education, think about action steps that we've talked about. I'll throw forward just a brainstorming idea. So you've got this Washington group tool that helps to assess. And Nasser, I'm going to come to you on this. Let's say that we put a lot of money into community health workers with World Vision and Plan and Save the Children and UNICEF and other organizations that are out there on the ground, meeting families, meeting kids all around the world already, funded by taxpayers and organizations and from around the world. Can you imagine if we could teach those community health workers to understand what potentially disability might look like, physical or intellectual, developmental, and give them the tool to help do some assessment, of some of these families, so that you can give the families an explanation of what's happening, or the individuals an explanation, maybe to some degree, what's happening, and then, of course, it's not too much of a stretch to imagine what school might look like, or some form of inclusion once you've identified, once you've generated some data at that individual level, but then, of course, at an aggregate level. IDRC, so this Washington group, StatsCan is a part, from my understanding, of the Washington group. They're coming, I think, to the committee next week, so we'll get a chance to ask about the tool. But when I think about IDRC and the function that IDRC has, it's a research function, it's an information function, it's a evidence function, right? So as you kind of listen to that kind of brainstorming, it's not a stretch to imagine a place where that you put a research function on top of that to gather that evidence and assess the evidence and sort of see what incremental next steps we can take quickly to generate meaningful action right now. Is it?
No, I mean, the Washington tool sounds fantastic to me. A lot of the innovations that we're testing were developed by community-based organizations like World Vision, and it's really, you know, if that really is a proven innovation that can have an impact, that's the sort of thing that we do these calls. What's working? Where is it working? Prove it's working. And then, as you said, let's test it and scale it in different contexts, because you have to adapt it to the different context. And you have to train people in those countries, up to 80 countries that we're working in, and to scale it so that it's sustainable. It sounds fantastic. Whether, you know, we'd have to look at it sort of carefully, where, you know, there's a certain way that we operate in terms of competitive calls and making sure that the research is really quality and so forth. But, you know, on the surface of what you're describing, Mr. Lake, it sounds like a really interesting initiative. Yeah.
So to Nafisa and Doroti, we got a minute and a half left in my time. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. I will let you know that in the last committee meeting, I think we got 3 organizations to commit to looking at the call to action and potentially signing on. So still focusing on the call to action that you've worked so hard on. But do you have thoughts on that? Nafisa has her hand up. So
You could have an extra minute to be fair with everyone also.
Thank you, Mike. You know, I really think that I want to add on to the importance of data. I think it's really important to generate the data, but not just about where are the people with disabilities, what are their functional issues, but also I think it's really important to create data on what works and what's not working, right? In terms of practices and approaches to supporting students with disabilities. And I think that's really vital. And also kind of mediating understanding of the data. We've been working with the government of South Sudan, Mozambique, and Burkina Faso and Ethiopia to really understand and interpret the data, because this is actually a challenge. Now you have the data, what do you do with it? How do you kind of organize your interventions that are going to be most impactful for supporting students based on the data you've collected? And this is where support is really required. And I'm really fully with you that if we can get all development community-based organizations collecting data, sitting down and analyzing it, and create in a participatory way, designing programs that respond to the need, I think we will make a big step change. On the call to action, I really feel this is a wonderful opportunity with the Disability Summit coming up also soon for Canada to champion and taking action around it, endorsing the call to action, creating understanding about what does this mean among education advisors that are based in countries representing the government of Canada, need to understand what is disability inclusion, what is disability inclusive education, what can they do, how can they advise the governments that they are working with. I think those are things that need, practical things that need to happen, and guidance notes need to be created around teacher education, all these different subtopics, so that people are equipped to provide technical support and leadership around this topic of disability inclusive education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. J'invite Monsieur Alexis Brunet-Duceppe de prendre la parole.
Mr. Alexis Brunet-Duceppe, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Paris, could you tell us about the disparities that exist within the minority group that constitutes children with disabilities when it comes to educational success? You talked about it not being a homogeneous group, but are there disparities when it comes to success rates? I don't have any statistics to give you on specific groups concerning children with disabilities. What I have seen is that in Canada, I think it's the same thing abroad, a good proportion of children with disabilities do not succeed. Yes, they're in school. At least they are in school. But in Quebec, for example, a quarter of children with ADHD live without any certificates. And when I say a quarter, it's compared to the rest of the population. So this is interesting because we're talking about research. This is the kind of research that we need to find out if there's a group that drives the statistics in a certain direction. Is it easier for some? Of course, because there's great variety of children with disabilities, even within a same group. The level of severity of disability is different. For example, if we are looking at the autistic spectrum, it's very broad. We need to know that, yes, obtaining a certificate is one thing, but what does it lead to? Sometimes children are asked to do a certain program, but after that, they don't have much of a future. Are they supposed to get a job? Are they supposed to be self-employed? Unfortunately, I don't have any figures for you. Well, overall, that's the conclusion I was seeking. Mr. Faruqi, I have a question for you. You may find it interesting, I hope. To what extent should program funding criteria be flexible to adjust to the cultural specificities of the countries where those programs are being developed? I imagine that operations are not the same in India as in Chad, for example. And to what extent should funding criteria be flexible to take into account those cultural specificities? Thank you for the question. Of course, we need to adapt to the local context, to the local culture of each country where we work. Did I understand your question well? Is it a challenge to convince people working in the departments who are implementing programs? Is it difficult to make them flexible because we don't work in all countries the same way? Is it a difficulty that you've seen? Sometimes within the same country, there are also differences. The culture may differ from one part of the country to another, but I really don't believe that it's a major challenge. The problem is how we work. So it's all about the training of your people, which is different from one country to another. Okay, I understand that. Okay, Miss Paris, here in Canada, are there cultural differences when it comes to dealing with children with disabilities, or do you work the same way irrespective of who you're working with? Are you talking, what type of differences are you talking about? Okay, when you implement when programs are being implemented, when you work with children with disabilities, do people take into account the cultural differences of the kids? Maybe people work differently with certain communities than others, Anglophones versus Francophones, indigenous people, and so on. So do people adjust well to those differences? Is it necessary to adjust methods depending on the children we're working with? I think it's important to establish differences and to recognize the fact that there are cultural differences, there are linguistic differences. Is it really being done on the field? I don't think it's something I've seen, but there are cultural differences. The culture of education from one country to another, from one province to another, from one region to another, from one school to another. And this is up to the people doing the job. Who is the teacher? Who is the school principal? Who is the person offering the service? It comes to the issue of training. It comes down to training. So what you're saying is very important. It is important to take into account the cultural differences. When you work with parents, I imagine that it's not the same. I believe that you work with parents with different cultures, so that's something that you must also consider for the well-being of the children. Yes, in Canada, there are lots of newcomers, lots of new Canadians who have lots of difficulty with the educational system here. There are procedures that are different. There are parents that are new to the country that are intimidated in the system.
You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you to all of our guests. One of the things that we've heard today is that, first of all, that there is a need for better data, but that there are solutions that are being done. I think, Mr. Faraki, you were speaking about examples of what works and how it can be very cost effective if it is done properly. And what it's making me think about is, how do we make sure, I assume what's happening in Canada and the way that we are talking about, using our development dollars for inclusive education, this is happening in other countries as well. How are we making sure that there is data, that we are sharing data that we are getting with other countries, that there is, that we lessons learned, best practices, all of those things are being shared across the world, and that we are informing donor countries, but also in using that to increase the effectiveness of the programming on the ground. And perhaps I'd start with you, Mr. Forty.
Yeah, thanks. That's kind of, in a nutshell, the purpose of this large initiative that we have on education. So it does work sort of at the country level in terms of scale improving innovations and adapting them to the local context. But often, they're multi-country projects. So there's 3 or 4 countries that we're working on, and we're trying to scale things in Tanzania and Uganda and Kenya, for example. So there's that knowledge sharing within the region. And as I said, we have these 4 regional hubs, one for each sort of the way that we carve out the world. So 2 in Africa, 1 in Asia, and 1 in Latin America, where you have up to 20 countries that come together to identify what are their pain points when it comes to education, what do they need to know, where don't they have evidence, and what works, and share it with the neighboring countries. In addition to that, we have some programs which are just what we call global projects, which are sort of ensuring that we're capturing global public goods on education, knowledge on education, and infusing that back into the local systems. Yeah.
Well, and I would assume, even country-wide, the diversity of needs would be very, very, I think about some of the work I've done in Nicaragua, where what's needed in Managua is very different than what's needed up in the northern regions of the Mosquito Territory. So it's, even within country can be very, very diverse. I wonder if anyone online would have any other comments that they'd like to make. I see we have
Ms. Sharma, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to respond to the question around knowledge sharing, I do want to again bring to the notice of the members here that Canada is a member of the Global Action on Disability Network, which is the GLAD network, which is a body that brings together governments, donors, multilateral organizations on their common commitment to advance disability inclusion. Knowledge sharing is one of the main objectives of this network as well. And we have good examples like Nafisa already alluded to from the United States, from the UK, from Australia, from many of these Scandinavian countries. And I think Canada's role in contributing to that global public goods in terms of knowledge is important. I also want to flag the importance of working with the missions in countries, because I think that gap of what is happening at the global level and what missions are doing at the national level is still quite significant, and also the importance of working with community-based organizations. This also speaks to an earlier question about, how do you reach children with disabilities in far-flung areas and remote areas of countries in Africa, in Francophone countries. For example, in Niger, our members work extremely, committedly on inclusive education, and they have different projects which have been running. And currently, we are working with a member in Niger to support the implementation of a project on education in emergencies for learners with disabilities. So the importance of working with community-based organizations and sharing the knowledge with them is quite critical. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we give the closing for Ms. Babu for 1 minute, please.
Yes, and I'd like to add to that. It's really important to bring people along. Co-designing with experts in the country, co-designing capacity development programs is really vital, right? And making sure that also ensures that there's ownership and that there's transfer of skills. And I think that this is really important investment moving forward to ensure that we do work together with people in country, make sure that the products are culturally sensitive and that we are aware of some of the barriers and that could exist in the rolling out of a particular program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Buba. And now, thanks for our witnesses, for your presentation, for your participation, sharing ideas, and helping us in our important study for international inclusive education for persons with disability. We appreciate that you took the time to meet with us, to share ideas, even your great important expertise in this important subject. If you feel some interesting additional information is needed, please feel free to contact or to write for the subcommittee or directly to our clerk. I could assure you we have an excellent clerk working with us. So on behalf of all members of the committee and the staff, we thank you very much for your presence and we wish you a wonderful day. Thank you. If the will, that's all the time we have. If the will, okay. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.